सभी अतिथियों, वक्ताओं और प्रतिभागियों का महात्मा गांधी अंतर्राष्ट्रीय हिंदी विश्वविद्यालय की ओर से स्वागत है। आज धर्म जाय व्याख्यान श्रृंखलाओं की द्वितीय कड़ी आपके समक्ष प्रस्तुत है, जिसमें कुल 4 व्याख्यान प्रस्तावित हैं। तो सबसे पहले मैं प्रोफेसर सीडी सेबेस्टियन से आग्रह करूंगा कि वे मंच पर अपना स्थान ग्रहण करें। आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है सर। मैं स्वामी नारायण थेस्ट वेदांत व्याख्यान माला प्रस्तुत करने के लिए प्रोफेसर याज्ञेश्वर शास्त्री जी को मंच पर आने का आग्रह कर रहा हूं। आपका स्वागत है सर। जय नारायण व्यास विश्वविद्यालय से पधारे प्रोफेसर धर्मचंद जैन सर, आपसे आग्रह है कि आप भी मंच पर अपना स्थान ग्रहण करें। प्रोफेसर जैन। ठीक सर। तो आज कुल 3 व्याख्यान इस एंडोमेंट लेक्चर सीरीज में प्रस्तुत होंगे। रिक्वेस्टिंग प्रोफेसर Paneerselvam sir to give me some words about the Endowment lecture series in this philosophical congress.
Actually, I came here to tell you about the new endowment lecture which has been created this year. Yesterday, I said that Professor T.R.B. Murthy endowment lecture was instituted, and our good friend Professor Shajananda Mishra has delivered that lecture. And another lecture which was created this year is A.K. Chatterjee endowment lecture. And that's the reason why I thought I should say a few words about this endowment lecture. The students of A.K. Chatterjee, in fact, Professor Vijay Kumar would say, don't say A.K. Chatterjee, utter full name, Ashok Kumar Chatterjee. So students of A.K. Chatterjee, as well as professors like Vijay Kumar, then Abhimanyu Singh, whom sir was mentioning yesterday, and also Sebastian, were mainly responsible for creating this endowment. And we have MOU with them. And Professor Vijay Kumar, who was mainly responsible and who was signed in the MOU also, has suggested the name of Professor C.D. Sebastian. And we always honor the request of the donors. So on their request, and of course he is our good friend, he is a well-known scholar, and the pamphlets which you have in your hand will show how he has been working on Professor A.K. Chatterjee's philosophy. So we thought that he is a very apt person to deliver this lecture. So.
Thank you, sir. Now, I'm inviting Professor C.D. Sebastian sir to deliver first Professor Ashok Kumar Chatterjee Endowment lecture. Welcome, sir.
Convener of the session, Rajiv Tension Rai sir, my fellow panelists, Professor Yagneshwar Shastri ji, Professor Dharamchand Jain ji, Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor Hanuman Prasad Shukla ji, IPC General Secretary Professor Paneerselvam ji, Treasurer Professor Devika Sakha ji, my agraj and good friend Professor Ambikante Sharma ji, Pankaj ji, Professor Bhattacharya ji, Professor Singh, Professor Mavo, Professor Dilip Kumar Khanda, sorry, Professor Rajni, Professor Uma Shankar ji, Kamlaji, very happy. I know almost all of you in here present. I must at the outset itself thank two important people who are responsible for this endowment lecture. First and foremost, Professor S. Vijaykumar of Banaras Hindu University, and with him Professor Abhimanyu Singh. And also Professor Paneer Selvam. He is the second person who made it possible for us to have this Professor Ashok Chatterjee endowment lecture. And I'm immensely indebted to Professor Paneer Selvam. When I was a research scholar long back, some 22 years ago in BHU, when I went for a national seminar, Professor Paneer Selvam was there in Ambel near Professor Paneer Selvam long ago. Our friendship began there, and all throughout, now almost 22 years, I graduated. I landed up in the IIT, but the simplicity and the honesty with which we used to interact never ceased. I'm grateful to you for that, and you have been always standing by supporting us, Professor Paneer Selvam. And I'm happy that we could constitute this endowment lecture during your tenure as General Secretary of the IPC. I'm not going to waste much time. I forgot to mention my good friend Jayant Upadhyayji and Sachidanand Mishra, Professor Sachidanand Mishraji. Sorry. Yes, no, Professor Jayant and we were together in BHU. Today he was telling we used to move around together. And he is one of the good Guru Bhakta, Professor A.K. Chatterjee, Professor Dr. Jayant Upadhyay, and Professor Sachidanand Mishraji too. And I am not wasting my time. I have given the handout. And if in case you did not get this handout, to the students, I can give you. I have some more. I have some more if you want. Yeah. I have some more, please. I will be following this handout, okay? I begin. Ashok Chatterjee, 1925 to 2021, Indian philosopher and Buddhist scholar who was professor of philosophy at Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi, passed away on the 21st of April 2021. He is best known for his monumental work on the Yogacara Vijnanavada school of Buddhism, titled The Yogacara Idealism, first published in 1962. A vigilant reading of the entire corpus of the writings of A.K. Chatterjee brings home the idea that metaphysics is one of his major concerns while doing philosophy. In his works, one finds that there is a metaphysical homecoming. And I have access to all the published materials of Professor A.K. Chatterjee. And I have gone through all of them. I have studied all of them in its essence. And this one, Metaphysical Homecoming, is from his small treatise, Modes of Being. Metaphysical Homecoming of A.K. Chatterjee, as I quote, metaphysics is subjective, and it reveals the profoundest truth about one's own being. And it is from his small treatise, Metaphysics, Subjectivity, Metaphysics, and Myth. Making of a philosopher, I'm not going to say anything about, you can read it, about his education and all, but please come to the second page. And the last, first three lines can beach me. During his childhood days and later in his formative years, to be a thinker, he was first inspired by his uncle, Professor A.C. Mukherjee of Allahabad University, and subsequently by his guru, Professor T.R.B. Mufti of Banaras Hindu University. At the same formative period, he used to have very serious philosophical discussions with many other leading luminaries in Indian philosophy, like Professor Kalidas Bhattacharya. He was also Sajaura Kirkward Fellow in Banaras Hindu University. And he was a great teacher. Let me just read out that one. A.K. Chatterjee taught from 1950 to 1963 at the University of Agra. Right now it is Bhimrao Ambedkar University, and had become the head of the Department of Philosophy. After the establishment of the Center of Advanced Study in Philosophy at BHU, he joined BHU in 63 and retired in 85 as professor and head, Department of Philosophy and Religion, BHU. A.K. Chatterjee taught logic and analytic philosophy. This is the most fascinating facet of his life. He taught logic and analytic philosophy. You see, to do Indian philosophy, to do particularly Buddhist philosophy, one should have the analytic mind and logic. If one is weak in analytic philosophy and logic, the Buddhist analysis, which precisely the Mahayana traditions, whether it is Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, Dharmakirti, or Dignaga, it cannot come out. So the best aspect of his persona is his capacity to do analytical philosophy and logic. And he taught that one in BHU. Indian Philosophical Council honored him with National Lectureship in 1992 and in Lifetime Achievement Award in 2014. He was president of the Metaphysics of Axiology, and there are some others I'm not reading. Next paragraph is of significance to me. A.K. Chatterjee never sought after privilege or positions, and he never indulged in partisan self-promoting politics of academia, holding fast to the honesty of the philosopher. Socrates is dear, but truth is dearer. And we all, his students, used to emulate this philosophical stand. Socrates is dear, but truth is dearer. And he used to be a person who can be having an impeccable character for avoiding any sort of chaplacy in his lifetime. Chatterjee was such an honest man. Those who have been privileged to listen to him and study with him appreciate him to be an excellent and esteemed teacher. Though his academic relationship with his students was inspiring and enlightening, it was at the same time demanding academically. Yet his personal relationship with his students and colleagues was of an understanding, loving, and caring nature. Chinmay Goswami of happy memory, Professor Goswami was a professor of logic in Hyderabad Central University. Chinmay Goswami of happy memory, who was A.K. Chatterjee's PhD student, wrote, Professor Ashok Chatterjee, for many of us, has been a friend, philosopher, and guide. Among many things, he taught me to think independently, through his unreasonable but effective silence, unquote. Now I just come to the major philosophical works of A.K. Chatterjee. I just read it out. A.K. Chatterjee was an unparalleled authority on Buddhism in general and Yogacara in particular. Professor David Kalapuhana wrote about Professor A.K. Chatterjee's magnum opus, the Yogacara Idealism, in this way. I quote, Ashok Chatterjee has produced one of the few detailed and significant treatments of Yogacara. His work, Yogacara Idealism, has not, unfortunately, enjoyed the same publicity as his teacher's work. He was referring to T.R.V. Murthy's Central Philosophy of Buddhism. Yet, it is no way second to Murthy's treatment of Madhyamika philosophy, unquote. Professor Samdom Rinpoche, former Prime Minister of Tibetan government in exile, who was a professor at Benares Sanskrit University, and whom we in the academia in Benares and other ways respect very highly, Professor Samdoche monk, wrote about A.K. Chatterjee's Yogacara Idealism in this way. Professor A.K. Chatterjee had made known 4.5 decades ago his philosophical acumen and masterly talent through his magnum opus, the Yogacara Idealism, and that has run into different editions after its first publication in 1962. Often it has been said, a tree is known through its fruits. And this is true of Professor A.K. Chatterjee, as he is known through his erudite writings to the academic world, Professor Rinpoche's, unquote. And his works include the Yogacara Idealism, readings on Yogacara Buddhism, facets of Buddhist thought, and the concepts of Sakshi in Advaita Vedanta. And his smaller treatises are Concept of Maya, Concept of Pramana, Indian philosophy, are ethical statement, non-conclusive, non-speculative metaphysics, reasoning in Indian philosophy, metaphysics, subjectivity and myth, Pratita Samutpad in Buddhist philosophy, in idealism and absolutism, a Buddhist synthesis, the Madhyamika and the philosophy of language, an introduction to Yogacara Buddhism, insights and paradox in Buddhist thought, truth and objectivity, modes of being, predicates, meaning, use and reference, concept of Sarupya in Buddhist philosophy, Sautrantika theory of possession, the concept of Sakshi in Advaita Vedanta, the types of absolutism and revisitation, and Apoha, Buddhist theory of meaning. These are his works, and all his works are going to be published soon as a collected volume. The core of A.K. Chatterjee's philosophy, this is, I will have 10 more minutes. Yeah. Yeah. The core of his philosophy I'm going to bring. A.K. Chatterjee's page 43. A.K. Chatterjee's contribution to Indian philosophy in general, Buddhist philosophy in particular, cannot be overestimated. He taught and wrote on Indian philosophy always, putting precisely across the candid stance of each philosophical system in India with critical mind of a philosopher. You know, yesterday Professor Panneerselvam was quoting Professor Rajni Shukra's statement, decolonizing Indian philosophy. I think that's an overstatement. If I go back in time to the time of K.C. Bhattacharya, to the time of Professor T.R.V. Murthy, to the time of Professor A.K. Chatterjee, they had already decolonized. They knew they were masters in the Western philosophical traditions, but they thought in Indian way. And they made sense of Indian philosophy with philosophical robust moorings. So I will never say, I will never advocate my students in IIT Bombay to decolonize, because unless and until you know philosophical nuances discussed in the philosophy, and I will never label philosophy of perennis as Indian, African, Asian, or American philosophy. Philosophy of perennis is universal, and geographical boundaries of the philosophizing is a misnomer, and I will never appreciate doing that one. And if I go and do philosophy in America, will I be called as an American philosopher or an Indian philosopher? So this geographical boundaries is a misnomer, and I think Professor Chatterjee was as a replica of this one. He generously unraveled the subtle nuances of Indian philosophical schools and their many ideas in writings, and also to all those who had the fortune of being closer to him. He asserted that there is a difference between Indian philosophizing and Western philosophy. I quote, in the West, a philosopher always reserves to himself the liberty of looking at things afresh and having his own individual intuition. He certainly belongs to a tradition, but questioning his own tradition appears to be built in the tradition in itself. Criticism of the tradition is itself traditional. Such an institution is conceivable in India, where the whole emphasis falls on self-abnegation on the part of the individual thinker. Indian philosophy is atemporal, ahistorical. Systems here are presented as timeless verities, unquote. This is true of him as an Indian philosopher. He fell in line with the tradition and contributed his share. Though enormous it is for a student of Indian thought in terms of profoundness. However, he had a critical stance of his own while being truthful to the philosophical tradition he was adhering to. As I stated at the outset, an observant reading of A.K. Chatterjee reveals that metaphysics was one of his foremost concerns while doing philosophy. In his works, one finds that there is undoubtedly A.K. Chatterjee's metaphysical homecoming. A metaphysics is subjective and reveals the profoundest truth about one's own being. Further, though though he said that the term metaphysics in a way is an abuse of language, the act of that philosopher does while doing metaphysics is a homecoming with or without the use of language. Speculative metaphysics has always had its staunch proponents, though for 3/4 of the 20th century, it was very much a marginal enterprise in philosophy. Even now, the attitude towards speculative metaphysics among most philosophers remains the same, with some sort of antipathy. Among the contemporary philosophers in India, A.K. Chatterjee has always been an ardent thinker in speculative metaphysics. He has ever argued that non-speculative metaphysics is a contradiction in terms. As he vehemently said, metaphysics is thus essentially speculative. Non-speculative metaphysics, as I see it, a contradiction in terms. It would have to be impossible a scheme of concepts involving no conceptual revision, which I have called speculation. You know, this is a reaction to Professor J.F. Strauss, P.F. Strawson's Individuals. There was a book, Individuals, in the early 70s or late 60s. And you know, what I get is that after reading Chatterjee, I went to read P.F. Strawson. So what I'm saying, that he was abreast with what was happening in the philosophical circles in the world, and he interpreted philosophizing in his own way. Speculation is part and parcel of doing metaphysics in the rational scheme of A.K. Chatterjee. Next para. A.K. Chatterjee held that metaphysics is not just about philosophizing on being qua being, but it is much more than that. According to A.K. Chatterjee, a metaphysician sets himself at the center of his world and makes his own world. I quote, impelled by the unconscious stirrings in the depth of his being, a metaphysician fashions a world out of his experience, a world that is particularly his, and is and can be nobody else, in order to fulfill some profound purpose of existence. It is fascinating to see how A.K. Chatterjee brings the element of subjectivity in the entire scheme of doing metaphysics. According to him, metaphysics is nothing but an attempt to achieve a complete selfhood. One's ego or self finds itself as an alien among the other things of the world. It feels as a thing, like other things of the world, for other things in the world are not of one's making, nor are they of one's choice. It has no other option but to be with other things. The self or the ego, in the face of other things of the world, can feel a sort of nothingness, which in turn can create a tension in itself. Then there arises a need that is not physical, but metaphysical or spiritual, to remove the tension just mentioned, as this is done by creating a world in which the self or ego would feel completely at home. And I am leaving the passage for the paucity of time. Come to the next paragraph, page 5. I'm winding up, please. A.K. Chatterjee argued that in this sense, there was tremendous possibility of alternative selfhoods that could be thought of and constructed speculatively in different systems of metaphysics. He further argued that if we could leave aside self for time being, we could come across the next construct, that is world. The subjectivity and the world are interrelated. The world that the metaphysician speaks of, for that much anyone, is a product of metaphysical construction. World is not a given fact. So lovely. World is not a given fact. It is a metaphysical concept. The world, as we understand, as a whole, is the horizon of knowing in which the objects known are embedded. But the world is a metaphysical concept. The world itself is never known. What are known are things, and that belong to the world. We know only things in the world, not the world. The world. But when one knows a thing in the world, the same epistemic process will enable him, her, him, or him to know other things related to that one. A thing per se is never known in speculation. it shall be known only in relation to other things of the world. Yet Chatterjee explains it in this way: a thing is never known by its own isolation, itself in isolation, but only supported by other things. The thing known is certainly the focal point, but behind that there is a receding background, but for the presence of which the thing would not stand out and be an object of knowledge. When I come to a table, I am also dimly aware of there being other things beside the table, so that it is known as the thing amongst others. The table is the apex of submerged base, as it were. When I turn my attention to these other things, they in turn, in their own turn, presuppose still other things, so that the final analysis, the base of knowledge seems to be entire world, unquote. Thus, A.K. Chatterjee has shown, if we analyze the speculative games we play while doing metaphysics, we come to the realization that doing metaphysics is purely subjective and eventually amounts to a myth. It is in fact not at all a rational enterprise on being qua being, but it is puzzled the mystery, and it is not a problem. This is stunningly a novel idea we get from A.K. Chatterjee. This is from Professor Bijoy Barua, who was in IIT Kanpur and Delhi. He states after reading Chatterjee, this is a stunningly novel idea we get from Chatterjee that calls for further creative enterprises in metaphysics for a contemporary Indian philosopher. I conclude, I being a student of Buddhist thought, and under the guidance of Professor A.K. Chatterjee, would like to submit that one of the major contributions of A.K. Chatterjee is his works on Yogacara Vijnanavada school of Buddhist thought. He termed the Yogacara philosophy as epistemological idealism, as opposed to the ontological metaphysical idealism of Advaita. For the students, those who have come, you see, when we discuss philosophical idealism, that happened in the 18th, 19th century in the Western philosophy, and Professor Chatterjee was aware of what was happening in the philosophical discussions. And philosophical idealism can be divided into two: epistemological idealism and metaphysical idealism. Today, people call it as ontological idealism. And metaphysical idealism or ontological idealism, we have a paramount example in Indian philosophy, that is Advaita Vedanta, ontological idealism. Whereas we don't have any other school in Indian philosophy which exposes epistemological idealism other than Yogacara Vijnanavada school of Indian Buddhism. And if you want to know, when I say Yogacara Vijnanavada school, always remember Professor Chatterjee makes a difference. Yogachars are different and Vijnanavadins are different. For Chatterjee and for me, my study also says the same. For the Vijnanavadins, Asanga and Vasubandhu and all of them, there is nothing given in the consciousness. There is a grahak doya shunya. There is nothing, there is no subject, there is no object. There is only pure conscious. Sarvakalam yatha bhavat saiva vidyapti matrada. There is only one that remains there. There is no subject-object duality. And what do you know? When it comes to the epistemological, logical school of Buddhism, Dignaga, Dharmakirti, then the others, there is something given in the knowledge, something given in the consciousness as knowledge. So there is a difference. So when people say Yogacara Vijnanavad in one stroke, two schools are represented and they have differences that Chatterjee has really explained in his own works. And one more thing for my students, and epistemological idealism is opposed to epistemological realism. In Western philosophy, epistemological realism is a subset of objectivism. That means things exist independent of the minds, where you have gamut of literature available today, because I come from a department where my colleagues are, 5 of them are analytic philosophers, those who do analytic philosophy. So I'm aware of that one. So that's what, epistemological. As observed ontological, A.K. Chatterjee was abreast with the discussions in the contemporary philosophy in the West on epistemological idealism. Epistemological idealism is the view that the contents of human knowledge are inevitably determined by structure of human thought. everything that we know is held to be so permeated by creative, formative, and constructive activities of the mind. For the Yogacharyans, this mind is always creative. This is a vipak. I'm not going to that one. That claims knowledge becomes awareness. Okay. My study, the Buddhist corpus informs me that Prajnaparamita literature in general and Yogacara particularly can be viewed as a project of episteme rather than ontology, and that we did not find a ground of the same sort of Atman Brahman paradigm, the Vedantin, paradigm of the Vedantin in the Buddhist flux of experience, which Professor Sachidananda Murthy was highlighting yesterday, the conception of absolute. And I have a difference in that position. That's it. Thank you so much. Sorry.